So for the last few weeks, we've been in anguish, and I still crunch my nose up, anguish, with Paul about his sadness over so many of his people, the Israelites, the Jews, the people that he has loved and served as a Pharisee for so long. He's sad over there being this great abundance of folks that are not being drawn to Christ. And he continues on this same theme with our lesson for this week, as he continues further into chapter 11. This is what he writes. This is chapter 11, verse 11 through 21. Again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their full inclusion bring? I am talking to you, Gentiles. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, then so are the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to those other branches. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. Granted. But they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Now, in reading that this week, there were two things that kind of jumped out at me. One was the first line, which was, did they stumble as to fall beyond recovery? And the other, that the purpose of the Gentile ministry was to create envy in those who had not fallen in the fold. So I thought I would spend some time on each one of those and kind of like give two sermons in one. Promise that each one will not be full length. One on stumbling beyond recovery, and one on this positive view of envy. And I want to do the envy one first, because it makes sense to do it that way. Because of all the 7 deadly sins, envy is the one that I dislike the most. You can ask Claire that. She will tell you. It causes the most problems. It's so bad that 2 of the 10 commandments are about envy. Thou shalt not covet, right? But it's not just thou shalt not covet. It's not thy neighbor's wife, not thy neighbor's house, his slaves, his animals, or anything else. Pretty big on this coveting thing. Puts it in 2 different places. So let's try to define what envy is. If pride is self-idolatry and disordered love, envy is its cousin. It's disordered hate. Envy is instead consumed with the idea that everyone else has something. Everyone else, everything else, is threatening or diminishing to us. St. Thomas Aquinas says that envy is the hatred of a good enjoyed by one's neighbor, or the rejoicing in your neighbor's harm. The proud man wants to usurp the Lord's rightful power. That's pride, right? I want to be God. But the envious man wants there to be no God at all. The word envy comes from the Latin word invidia, which literally means seeing inside out. Looking at things the wrong way. You can hear it in video, like video, and in being without sight, without being able to see things in the proper way. This fits into, in Dante, the Divine Comedy, the way that envy is worked out is in purgatory, not in hell, but in purgatory. And they're walking up to try to rid themselves of these feelings like pride and lust and envy. The thing that they do with envy is they have wire that shuts their eyes so that they cannot see. It reminds me of Thumper and Bambi and his daddy. Like, what did your daddy say? If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. This is, if you can't see anything nice, don't see anything at all. Put those blinders on and be thankful for what it is that you have. And the else is envy. The parson in the Canterbury Tales says that it is the worst of all sins because it's the only one that seeks to pull others down rather than just falling from your own virtue. If I have pride and I allow myself to fall, it's just me. Envy wants to rip down other people as you go. Our Old Testament lesson is a great example of this envy as well. If you'll look at Jonah chapter 4, verses 4 to 11. But the Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade, and waited to see what would happen to the city. And then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm which chewed the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about this plant?" "It is," he said. "I'm so angry. I wish I were dead." But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" Proverbs 14:30 says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Paul himself, in this very letter, Romans 1:29 says, "They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice." I can't stand envy. I can't. It drives me crazy. We used to have an envy bush in our yard, which is at our old house, which was down the hill. And when any of the kids would be acting envious, I said, "You've got to run to that envy bush, touch it, and come back." The threat of the envy bush became enough. "But she has welcome sheep." Envy bush. We see it in our world too. In adults, for sure. There's nothing worse for the community, for the country, than the politically correct push for this radical egalitarianism, the false equality of outcomes. There's a difference between equal opportunity and equal results. It just is. Hatred of another person's success, which we've defined envy to be, not only hurts us and our relationships, but it tears down the foundation that we build our communities on. Trust, caring, empathy, all of these things. No two people in the world are given the same fortune. No two people are given the same talent. No people are given the same health. No two people are given the same ingenuity, the same work ethic. It doesn't work. Equality is not the answer. We're just not the same. And to think otherwise destroys what we actually are. Now, why aren't we the same? Because obviously it's not God's will that we would be all the same. And that's hard to accept sometimes. God seems to like things that break categories. He likes that individualness that breaks through categories. And equality is just too boring, I guess. God likes things a little messy. Equal is straight lines and perfect angles. But what natural map of rivers and lakes and streams and mountains has those same right angles and straight lines? Instead, it's just the city maps. And who makes those? We do. Order, straightness, equality, everything in their boxes. That's the human way. But God makes the lion and he makes the lamb. And God makes the cheetah and he makes the elephant. God makes the hippo, which lives in the water, and the sailfish, the flea, and the whale. Equality just does not seem to be God's thing. So this envy thing is having an ungrateful heart that is blind to the gifts that we have been given and focus on our neighbors. Looking at the greener grass that's on the other side of the fence. So sure that the other person has it so much easier than you do. Wishing to take a walk in someone else's shoes in theory, but never having the guts or the experience of having done so. It's a lack of gratitude and a lack of empathy because we all face trials and nothing is as easy or as bad as it seems. It's kind of like being a Redskins fan, right? The Redskins are not as good as they appear having won 2 games. And they're not as bad as they appear having lost a game. And God knows after playing the Giants at 1-6 today, if they lose, we'll be talking about firing the coach and everything else, forgetting the fact that they've won 2 games. It's not the way. The grass isn't greener. It's not always easy to walk in someone else's shoes. It's not as bad as it seems, and it's not as good as it seems. But as despicable as envy is, and I think I've painted a pretty big picture of how despicable envy is, look at how Paul uses it here. What do you think of that? What do you think of God using sin as a means of inspiring folks to salvation? Paul of all people. Does this mean we should sin so grace abounds? He says, by no means. Isn't God made greater every time we sin because his grace is greater? By no means. Paul, you got God using sin as a way to bring us to salvation. He says, I take pride in my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my people to envy and save some of them through envy. I hope that it will arouse my people to envy. I'm wanting to send my children to an envy bush, and Paul wants to use it to bring people to God. Now, I've always said that I am not real comfortable with the idea of scaring people to salvation with threats of the judgment and hell and brimstone and fire and all that kind of thing, because I don't think that it creates a lasting, genuine love. But how about this envy thing? Can envy, which we've shown to be a vile sin, a horrible sin, a community-shattering, relationship-destroying sin. Can envy be a path to salvation? Can envy, which drives wedges between people, separating them, dividing them, and building walls of resentment between them, actually be a step towards salvation and a fuller relationship with God? If we are to listen to Paul, and he's calling us to, and it's in the Bible, and we've been talking about it for weeks now, yes, it must be. God can even use the vilest of sins as a means to bring us towards salvation. Now, we talked about God softening and hardening hearts. Is it possible that this is one of those ways that he does it? One thing that it shows, one thing that envy shows, is desire. Envy shows a desire. And whether it's the desire for the thing or the desire for the gift from the person bestowing it, it rouses desire. And desire for God is a marker. It shows something about where our hearts are. I said earlier that Paul uses the word envy in chapter 1. But the word that he uses there for envy is different than the word he uses here for envy in Greek. It's theonao in 1. Theonao. And theo is that God is the word for God. It has that root of God in it. Theonao. It's almost like being angry at God. Envy is being angry at God. Theonao. But envy in Romans 11 is a word parazelospo. I don't know either, right? Parazelospo. I'm not going to make you say it, but I'm going to say a little bit of something. It's the root. You can hear, one of the things I like about learning Greek, really the only thing I like, is the idea that you can see the roots of English words in there. So when you hear para, you can think of parameter or all of those things that are like, it means beside. Para means beside. And zelothro actually means boiling. Beside boiling. And you hear the word zeal in there. It's the same idea. Beside zeal. So in other words, this word for envy is misplaced desire. The desire is there, it's boiling over, but there's zeal in it, but it's in the wrong place. Isn't this what Paul has been saying all along about where he was before his transformation on the way to Damascus, and where he finds his people, the Israelites, are? That they have zeal, but it's in the wrong thing. They have desire that's in the wrong thing. But the key is that they still have the zeal. They still have the desire. And as long as that's the case, God can use it. Which brings me to the next part. Maybe it is only one sermon with two parts. Did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? By no means. This really does speak to the glory of God. Because if God can use a sin like envy, which we've shown to be so vile, then there is nothing that he can't use to bring us to salvation. There's nothing. There is no limit to God's power. He always shows up. And we see it again and again throughout the biblical story. Again and again, God shows up. And it's us that hides. It's we that hides, not us. It's ourselves. We are the ones who run away. But God is there again, 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 throughout, constant, steadfast. All of those words are about God. We are there hiding in the bushes, hoping God doesn't see it. Adam, where are you? I'm not here. And I'm not naked. Who told you you were? I said in the weekend welcome that I sent out how important context is. We've already looked at it once today with the idea that Paul uses two different words for this that we translate as the same. That word envy. There are two little different things that you can get from envy there. But think about an earlier point that Paul makes and how much his words then echo what he's dealing with now. Those words then make this true. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all of creation, including envy, it seems, will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ. Nothing. Not even envy, not even the greatest sin. Nothing can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. For God is very much in control, and everything he uses as a means to bring us toward salvation. He uses everything as a way to bring us toward salvation. And means to give us a new chance at extending and passing on grace. So imagine that. If everything that you come into contact with is doing two things. Every single thing that you come into contact, every person, every rock, every bird chirping, everything is doing two things. One, it's bringing you, God's using it to bring you to salvation. And number two, it's another chance of extending grace outward. For as he says, we are grafted into a vine. We are not the roots, but branches grafted in. We do not make the plant holy. The root does. The root is what is holy. Now, I put in an interesting poem that I thought spoke to me about this in the middle of the week from Wendell Berry, who... the book I have of his poetry is he writes, he calls them Sabbath poems, and he writes them as part of rest and a routine of this. He says, one day, I walked imagining what work I might do here. The place, once dark, made clear by work and thought, my managing the world thus made more dear. I walked and dreamed the sun and clouds, dreamer and day at odds. So as long as I was looking about what I could do to make this place different, we were at odds. The world in its great mystery was hidden by my dream. Today I make no claim. I dream of what is here. The tree beside the falling stream, that stone, the light upon the stone, and day and dream are one. Pride and envy have an interesting relationship there. The moment that he takes a step back and sees the world as it is and as a gift, it's amazing the peace that he finds that comes right along with it. Envy itself is a chance. Sin is a chance. Each day is a chance to see how the world, how God is speaking to us from each day, pulling us closer to him and allowing us to spread that love to our neighbors. May we go through our week attempting to see, to feel, to be, and to extend